Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we just got back from IMS, and I taught with Aya Medanandi a retreat on the theme of wisdom, emptiness, finding the heart of emptiness. And what I'd like to do this evening is to basically reprise a talk that capitulates the principal theme that I was trying to get through in the teachings, which is variations on the way of realizing emptiness. And the approach is that there have been in the Theravada tradition, there have been principally two directions of approach to realizing the nature of the mind, nature of reality, and eventually emptiness, and through that liberation. One method or one approach is the one that is most associated with the Burmese tradition, which puts its emphasis on the objective side of mind, on the Chittasakas. And the other approach is the one we find more often in the Thai tradition, Thai forest tradition, is beginning with the subjective side of mind, the Chitta. Now, it's my contention that either one of these methods works, both are valid, and they're both approaching the same problem from two directions, and that if either one is done perfectly, it incorporates the other one and they become identical. But we're beginning from a different side. So we start with the basic model of the mind that we find in the particularly in the Abhidhamma teachings, that the mind has this double aspect, the two aspects of mind. One is the Chitta and the other is called Chittasika. Chitta is the knowing mind. It's that which knows, Puru in Thai. It's absolutely simple and pristine. All it does is know. It has this one function. And when I say know, it's not in the sense of understanding, like you know how to do trigonometry. It's the sense of know as experiencing, of being present. So this is a basic function of mind, is the Chitta. And the Chitta, having just this one function, is absolutely simple, which is what makes it perhaps difficult to understand at first, because we find it easier to understand things that are very complicated. The mind wants to be able to, get bits and pieces and make a algorithm and a structure and so on, but the Chitta has none of that. It just is immediate, just knows. It's the aspect of mind that is ultimately subjective. And being subjective, being the knowing aspect of mind, it cannot itself become an object. And this is a tricky thing to understand. To use a metaphor or analogy, you can't see your own face. You can see other people's faces, but you can never see your own face. You can look in a mirror, but that's not your face. That's a reflection of your face. Likewise, a photograph or a painting. You cannot in any way ever see your own face directly. So the chitta cannot know itself in that regard. So if you try and look at the chitta, all you're really looking at is a thought about the chitta or an image of the chitta or some kind of approximation, but it's not the chitta itself. I had experience once going to a talk given by a Tibetan Rinpoche, and he was touching on, it wasn't the main theme of his talk, but he was touching on Dzogchen, and he told his listeners that they should take up the exercise of trying to look at the knowing mind, trying to observe the knowing mind. And I didn't think it was it would look good or be very diplomatic for me to challenge him and ask a question. The Theravadan monk standing up and sound like I'm challenging him. But afterwards, when I was speaking to him alone, I said that Rinpoche, you said in your talk that the practitioner should look at the knowing mind. Do you think that's actually possible? And he kind of hemmed and hawed around the question for a bit, and he finally came around to the answer, no, it's not possible, but it's a very good exercise to try. Well, trying to turn the mind inwards on itself. If it's not exactly the same thing, I think it's related to the medieval European alchemical symbol of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. It's a snake in a circle eating its own tail. If you imagine a snake, if you imagine that snake eating its own tail, bite by bite, all the way up, and imagine taking the last bite and there's nothing left. This is the problem of knowing your own mind, chitta. So generally practicing with the chitta, I don't think it's really accurate to say look at your knowing mind, but the way I like to phrase it is center yourself in the knowing. The other approach works with the chittasakas. Now the chittasakas, that the Pali word chittasaka refers to the objective side of mind, and the root of the word just means those things associated with chitta. Chaitasakas, the chitta's adjuncts or chitta's associates. And it's all the busy work of mind, all the processing that the mind does. Thought, emotions, sense impressions, feelings, imaginations, memories. No, all these things are chittasakas. And this side of mind is at least somewhat, to a large degree, possible to reduce the processing on this side of the mind to algorithms. And in modern times, a lot of functions, mental functions that we associate with mind are now mechanized. We can have computers, and they talk about artificial intelligence. And I think a lot of the debate and confusion about artificial intelligence comes from mixing up intelligence with consciousness. Anything that they've managed to do, or perhaps will ever manage to do with computer, would fall into the chittasaka side of the equation. No. And perhaps those modern developments help us to understand somewhat the nature of chittasakas. because we can see that things that previous generations thought were completely beyond mechanization or algorithms are now we're doing it. And that's what the human mind is doing with this stuff. I read a book once on the history of chess, and the book had been written in I think it was the 1940s, early 1940s, and it was a very interesting book. And the last chapter was on the future of chess. And the author said that some people are saying now that someday they'll build a chess-playing machine. And then he went on to prove in the rest of the chapter how this is quite impossible, it never could be done. Quite convincing argument, too. And now we have computers that do face recognition and many other things that previously were thought beyond capability. Because Chitta-Sakai are processes that can be examined in detail and seen to be, stepwise. They can be reduced to functions and algorithms. This is stuff that mind does, and we perceive them, or the Chitta perceives them as objects. They are the objects of Chitta. So the approach of using them in meditation is to try and be fully aware of the present object of consciousness at each moment. This is a vipassana. And there are different ways, different techniques that have been developed in Burma. In the West, they've met the exports from Burma. Schools that have exported from Burma are only a few. But in Burma, there were many schools of meditation that tried to develop different techniques for accessing this state of mind. It's better to think of vipassana as a state of mind than a meditation technique. The meditation techniques are skillful devices, clever means for accessing that state of mind. And the state of mind is to be clearly observant of the present object of consciousness without reacting to it. So the principle should be that no object is so trivial it can be ignored, and no object is so important it needs to be held on to. One of the greatest of the Burmese masters, Mahasi Sayadaw, in one of his writings, and he wrote quite a lot, one of his writings used a metaphor to describe the state of mind of a meditator who's doing vipassana correctly. He said it's like you're sitting in your car at a railway crossing watching a long train go by, and you're taking note of each boxcar and tanker and flatbed, and you know each car that goes by on the train, but you don't get out of your car and follow any particular car down the tracks because it's particularly interesting. Each one has its moment. It passes by, you know it, and that's it. And the attitude of mind to develop is one of equanimity, so that the objects that arise don't disturb the mind. The mind remains poised in this equipoise of clarity. The specific kind of equanimity that is developed in vipassana is called, in English, it's been translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi and others as specific neutrality. So you're specifically neutral. It's not just a general neutrality, you're specifically neutral about this object. So the Pali for that is tatra majjhatata, which literally means the state of being in the middle about that. Tatra is that. So the that is the pointer to specificity. So the mind has to have that precision. It's not good enough to just have a general fuzzy awareness and a fuzzy neutrality about a soupy mix of different things. You have to be precisely, keenly aware of the current object of consciousness for it to be really advanced, clear vipassana. So you can approach that state of clear knowing from either direction. If you are centered in the citta, then all the objects become clear just by default, because you're not moving from that clear central point. If you're making an effort to be clearly aware of the objects, then that will naturally center the mind in the citta. So from either direction, you reach this point of clarity of the mind knowing the object. And you come to see that it's empty both ways. The citta is empty, it's just a process. You can't assign a weight or a color or a shape to the citta. There's nothing there. It's just knowing. And the objects, when they're seen precisely, clearly, one by one, you see that they are each in their own essence empty. You see that nothing exists from its own side. Nothing has an own essence, a svabhava. And these two ways of practice each have their place, and I think a balance of. At some times, one is more efficacious than the other. Sometimes one is more needful than the other. There's a Tibetan text, the 6 yogas of Naropa, and one of them talks about something that's very similar to this, and talks of 2 ways of watching the mind that you can alternate between, which in this text is called sitting by the river and chopping with the axe. Sitting by the river is like being in the citta. You just find this central point and let everything pass by. Like you're sitting on the bank of a river and you're just watching the river float by. And chopping with the axe is like the Burmese meditations, like the objective vipassana style meditations, where everything that arises you chop it with the axe. It's like clearing brush. Each object you chop it away with the axe of the sharpness of the mind. And in ordinary life activity, we can use a balance of these techniques. The principal thing is to understand the nature of mind and the difference between citta and citasika. Because when we get in trouble with the mind, and we all know that that's possible, that we can fall into mental states of delusion or frustrated desire or anger. There's many ways we can fall into suffering through mental states. And when this is occurring, it's because we've identified with that state. We've gone off center. One metaphor to use to think, one way to think of it is like a hurricane. You've got a still center, like they call the eye of the hurricane. That's like the citta. And all the objects are like the cittasikas. They're whirling around the center point. As long as you're sitting in the center, you're at peace, but you can watch all these objects spinning around. But if you're out in the midst of the tumult, then you're going to be knocked around and you're going to suffer. You've gone off center. You also have a imperfect perspective. You're not seeing clearly. You're naturally deluded because you're off center. You're identified with something on the periphery. So you have a partial or a distorted view. And you're going to suffer. Another metaphor is like sitting inside a warm cabin while there's a blizzard going on outside. The blizzard being the emotional states. Right? From inside the cabin, you can see the blizzard. You know it's there. You know it's happening, but you're not suffering from it. But if you go outside and walk in the blizzard, you're going to suffer. You're going to be cold, you're going to be damp and blown around. It's not pleasant. You know? So the mental states, the emotions, the memories, thoughts, and so on are like objects, or like the weather outside the window of the cabin. Ajahn Mahabua often used the phrase, which is kind of parallel or close to this analogy. He would use the phrase that the chitta is your true home. And when you can center yourself in the chitta, there's a feeling of going home or coming home. And from that vantage point, you can then use the other skill, the chopping with the axe, or the vipassana of observing the contents of mind and being aware of what's going on. And this is not just for formal meditation. This can be very useful in daily life, in our activities and our interactions with other people, to be aware of our mental states, to try and be clearly conscious and cognizant of your mental states. And this can help prevent a lot of interpersonal mistakes in interpersonal relationships that can cause disharmony amongst people. If you're not clearly aware of your own mental states and impulses and you just follow them, you might say or do the wrong thing and cause trouble. But if you're clearly aware, if you see like irritation is arising in the mind with somebody or something they said or whatever, and you notice that in the mind there's irritation arising, I don't have to follow that. I don't have to act upon that. And you can then choose your actions and your words wisely, based on more than just an impulse. And that comes from knowing your own mind and knowing your mental states, and not believing in them or validating them or seeing them as something intrinsically real or important. This is just a mental state, and it's essentially empty. It's causally arisen. It has no substance. You can't measure or weigh a mental state. Right? It's empty. It's void. You see that more and more, that relationship between the knowing and the known, which is really the last duality to go. And makes some sense to speak in those terms all the way up to realization of the unconditioned, at which point we can't speak of any sort of categories. But that's basically what's happening at each moment in the mind. This is the simplest or most basic level of describing our experience as human beings, is the mind taking an object. And this is occurring at each moment, whether you're meditating or not. Even when you're asleep and dreaming, you're taking objects. And to quote Mahasi Sayadaw again, the meditator comes to see that there is only the mind and the object. There's only or in his phrase was, there's only the object, the arising of the object, and the mind knowing the object. And no third besides. The third meaning is self. Meaning there's the object arising and mind knowing the object, but there's nobody doing it. It's not something you're doing. It's just a process. Ultimately, an impersonal process unfolding moment by moment. And it's our task to try and make that fully conscious, to be fully awake to that process. And when you're fully awake to that process, that allows the process to begin to unravel. This samsaric existence is, in the last analysis, is something we're doing moment by moment. It's a choice we're making. And it's based on ignorance, because we don't fully understand the process. We keep playing this fool's game. We keep thinking that the next object is going to be something really good. Right? This is the underlying sort of impulse in the mind, is going for the next shiny thing. And the untrained mind reacts with desire and fear, primarily, pushed and pulled and spun around by these objects. But when the mind is firmly settled in this mode of vipassana and watching the objects from a position of this central neutrality, this tatra majjhatata, then the process continues, but the energy driving it diminishes. So in the end, the process becomes so weak that it slips, it stops, and the mind can realize the unconditioned. In the language of the Surimagga, the mind does that which it has not done since beginningless time, and alights upon non-occurrence. That's pretty good for a general coverage of that.
And I am Dhamma Kataya Sadhu Karam Dharamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodam.